Hello, my friends. Thanks for watching. Support the channel with a like and subscription.
I didn't think I was afraid of the woods. I grew up hiking in the Appalachians, sleeping under the stars, learning the quiet of the forest. But that weekend changed everything. It was supposed to be simple. Me, Alex, Mara, and Jake a weekend in a remote clearing that Alex claimed nobody had visited in years. The drive up was long, winding along roads that were more dirt than asphalt, lined with pines that leaned over as if to watch us pass. By the time we parked, the sun was low, painting the forest in shades of gold and orange. The clearing was perfect. A small pond glimmered at its center, surrounded by dense woods. We pitched our tents quickly and gathered firewood. Everything felt normal, for a while. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing faint sounds, the snap of twigs, a rustle too heavy to be a rabbit. I peeked out of the tent and saw the pond under the moonlight. The water was still, almost unnaturally smooth. And then I saw it, footprints, massive, human-like, leading from the tree line into the water, disappearing without a ripple. My stomach twisted. I woke Alex and pointed them out. He frowned, but said it was probably a deer or some other animal. Mara shrugged and muttered something about my imagination. Jake didn't stir, but I knew better. Whatever made those footprints was not normal. We tried to ignore it, but that night, the forest changed. Shadows deepened and shifted. The air grew heavy. I felt watched in a way that made my skin crawl. Then came the whispering, faint at first, like the wind, but insistent, almost intelligent. By morning, we decided to hike back, but the trail had vanished. Trees were twisted, roots snaking across the path in impossible patterns. Every direction looked identical. Panic set in. Alex tried to lead, but even he admitted we were lost. Hours passed, or maybe days, I don't know. Time distorted in that forest, and then the pond appeared again, closer than before. I could see movement beneath the water, ripples forming shapes like dark figures just below the surface. Mara screamed. I spun around and saw something standing at the tree line. Tall, impossibly thin, limbs bent at unnatural angles. Its head tilted in a way no human could manage. Its presence froze me to the spot. The figures multiplied. Shadows emerged from behind every tree, gliding silently toward us. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Their attention alone was enough to terrify us. Alex grabbed Mara and Jake, urging them to run, but we couldn't. Our legs were heavy, our minds clouded with fear. Then the pond changed. The water shimmered and blackened. From its depths, a figure rose, taller than any of the others, its limbs elongated, featureless. I realized with sudden horror that it wasn't coming from the pond. It was the pond, or at least something inside it had taken a form to confront us. I screamed, tried to run, but the forest itself resisted. Paths twisted, trees leaned inward, and every time I thought we were escaping, we were back at the clearing. The pond reflected not us, but versions of ourselves, hollow-eyed, distorted, staring back with expressions that weren't ours. Alex reached toward it. Mara and Jake followed. I grabbed Alex's arm, shaking him. "Don't!" I shouted, but it was too late. Their forms flickered like static on a screen, then vanished. I was alone. I stumbled through the woods, disoriented. Sunlight broke through the canopy in uneven streaks, but the forest refused to yield. And then I understood the truth. The forest, the pond, the shadows. they weren't trying to kill us. They were testing us, taking what they needed, our minds, our fear, our essence. Eventually, I found a trail, a real one this time, that led me back to the road. My car was there untouched. The GPS worked again. I drove home, shaken, exhausted, haunted. Authorities found no trace of the others. No footprints, no trail, no sign that anyone else had been there. Weeks later, I returned to the area, determined to understand what happened. The clearing was gone. The pond, the trees, everything we had seen vanished as if it never existed. All that remained was an ordinary patch of forest, quiet and unremarkable. But at night, I dream of the pond. The water ripples, and I see Alex, Mara, and Jake standing silently beneath the surface, hollow-eyed, waiting. And sometimes, when I wake, I hear faint whispers outside my window, patient, deliberate, promising that the forest remembers, that it waits. I survive, but I know it's only temporary. One day, curiosity or misstep will lead someone else into that clearing, into that pond, and I will hear the whispers again. Because the forest never forgets, and some horrors are patient enough to wait decades for their next visitors. And one day, I know, it will find me too. I should have known something was off the moment I turned onto the gravel road that led to Black Pine Hollow. The locals in the tiny town nearby had avoided the topic when I asked about it, muttering that some places just aren't meant for visiting. I laughed it off. I was 29, experienced with camping, and had hiked deeper into the Appalachians than most people dared. A little local superstition wouldn't scare me. I arrived mid-afternoon, the sky streaked with pink and gold, and parked at a small pull-off near a creek. The forest was dense, the canopy thick, the air crisp and smelling faintly of wet leaves. I set up camp quickly, hoping to have time to explore before nightfall. My friend Tom was supposed to meet me the next day, so for now, I was completely alone. The first night passed quietly. I had a small fire, cooked a few sausages, and watched the sun dip below the mountains. Everything seemed perfect until I woke around midnight. At first, I thought it was the wind rattling the trees, but then I heard its soft, deliberate footsteps circling my tent. My stomach sank. "Tom," I whispered into the darkness, though I knew he wasn't here yet. No answer. I shined my flashlight into the trees. There was nothing, no deer, no human figure, but the sound continued, circling, brushing against the brush, quick and light. My hand shook. I considered running, but the forest was too dark, too dense to move blindly. I crawled back into my sleeping bag, trying to tell myself it was a dream, that I was imagining things. The next morning, the forest seemed heavier. The sunlight barely penetrated the canopy, and the creek that had run clear yesterday now looked darker, sluggish. I decided to hike along a faint trail to clear my head. It wasn't long before I noticed something strange. Footprints. Not deer or raccoon. Human, but elongated, narrow, and the toes curved unnaturally. They led deeper into the woods, then abruptly vanished. I returned to camp to find my backpack had been moved a few feet from where I left it. Nothing was missing, but the placement was enough to make me uneasy. I considered leaving, but pride, or stupidity, kept me from doing so. Tom arrived the next day, cheerful and oblivious to the tension in my face. He joked about my paranoia, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the forest itself was watching us, alive in a way that was intentional and patient. That night, We built a fire together and told stories. I tried to laugh, to feel safe with him there, but the shadows beyond the firelight seemed thicker than normal. And then we heard it, a low hum, resonating through the earth beneath our feet. Not wind, not animal, but something older, something deliberate. "What is that?" Tom asked, his voice unusually quiet. "I don't know," I admitted. "I think it's coming from the woods." The whispers followed, faint at first, almost like the rustling of leaves. Then they grew louder, forming sounds that could almost be words. Stay, follow, see. My pulse quickened. We decided to hike toward the source, reasoning that it might be another hiker or a strange natural formation. The trail twisted and turned in ways that didn't make sense. Landmarks we had passed earlier were gone, replaced by dense thickets and fallen trees. Even the creek had shifted. It was as if the forest itself had rearranged while we weren't looking. Eventually, we came upon a clearing that hadn't been on any map. In the center was a small stone circle, black and smooth, arranged like a primitive altar. The hum came from it, low and insistent. Shadows gathered at the edges of the clearing, elongated and stretching unnaturally. My stomach turned. Tom stepped forward, curiosity overtaking caution. I grabbed his arm. "Don't," I warned. But he didn't listen. The moment he touched one of the stones, the ground trembled and the forest around us seemed to breathe. Trees bent inward, shadows pooled thick and black, and the whispers coalesced into a single voice, repeating, "Join. See. Become." The shapes moved closer. They weren't human, but they weren't animals either. Limbs bent impossibly, heads tilted at unnatural angles, eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. I tried to pull Tom back, but he froze, staring into the darkness, eyes wide, unblinking. I panicked and ran, diving into the undergrowth. The shadows followed, pressing against me, tugging at my body. Somehow, I found myself back at the creek near our campsite. Tom was gone. The stone circle had vanished. The forest seemed calm again, ordinary even. I searched for him for hours, but there was no trace. The footprints were gone. The trees looked like they always had. By sunset, I accepted the grim truth. He was gone, claimed by whatever lived in the forest. I returned home, shaken and haunted. Nights are the worst. I dream of the stone circle, the shapes, and the whispers calling my name. Occasionally, I wake to find a shadow at the edge of my room, just beyond sight, watching. And sometimes when the wind blows from the mountains, I hear the faint hum of that altar beckoning me back. Weeks later, I found a small black stone in my pocket. I didn't remember taking it. It pulsed faintly like a heartbeat. When I held it, I could hear the whispers again, clearer now. Come, become. I realized then that the forest hadn't claimed Tom because it wanted him. It had claimed him because it knew I would come eventually. The Appalachian Mountains are beautiful, majestic, inviting, but they are patient. And patient things never forget, never release, and always wait for the next. One day I will return. I know it. And when I do, I won't fight. I've always felt a strange pull to the Appalachian Mountains. Growing up in southwestern Virginia, the ridges and hollows were a place I could disappear into, a place where the world felt quiet and predictable. But the mountains have their own rules, ones I never understood, until last September, when something went horribly wrong. My name is Claire. I was 27, burned out from my job, and desperate to escape. I rented a small cabin in a remote part of the Jefferson National Forest planning a week of solitude, hiking, and journaling. I told myself I needed to clear my mind. What I didn't know was that the mountains had other plans. The first day was beautiful. I hiked an old trail along a ridge, listening to the wind in the trees and the distant rush of a creek. I took photos of rock outcrops, moss-covered logs, and a deer that watched me silently before darting into the brush. That night, I set up my tent near the creek, lit a small fire, and felt more at peace than I had in months. The next day, I discovered an overgrown trail branching from the main path. It wasn't on any map, which piqued my curiosity. The canopy thickened, filtering sunlight into green-gold beams. The deeper I went, the quieter it became. Birds stopped singing. The wind died. Even the creek's sound faded until I felt like I had stepped into another world entirely. By mid-afternoon, I reached a hollow I'd never seen before. The trees here were enormous, twisted, and their roots clawed through the earth like fingers. At the center was a strange mound of stones, stacked unevenly, with symbols etched into the rocks, circles, spirals, jagged lines I didn't recognize. I took pictures, but my stomach churned as I realized something was wrong. The air felt thicker, heavier, and I felt eyes on me, though no one was there. I tried to leave, but the trail I had come down seemed to have vanished. No matter which direction I turned, I was back at the hollow. Panic set in. I wandered for hours, calling out, trying to retrace my steps. The forest seemed alive, bending, reshaping itself, folding over the paths I thought I knew. Then I saw them, figures at the edge of the clearing, tall, thin, with limbs that bent at impossible angles. Their faces were blank, featureless, but I felt their gaze in my chest, pressing, heavy, impossible to ignore. I ran, blindly, crashing through the underbrush, but the figures glided silently, keeping pace with me without effort. Night came too quickly. Exhausted, I collapsed near the stone mound, my back against a tree. That's when the whispers began, not carried by the wind, but inside my head. Hundreds of voices, overlapping, saying the same word, "Stay." I screamed. The forest seemed to pulse with the sound. My body trembled uncontrollably, and then I realized the stones weren't ordinary. They were feeding off something: fear, presence, awareness. They weren't just markers. They were a trap. Desperation gave me an idea. I tore a page from my journal, wrote my name, my birth date, my family's names, and placed it in the center of the stone mound. I whispered aloud, "Take this. Take it all. Let me go." For a moment, everything froze. The whispers stopped. The figures paused. The hollow seemed to inhale, then exhale. The forest reshaped itself again. I bolted. Branches tore my clothes, roots tangled my feet, but somehow I emerged onto the old logging trail I had used 2 days ago. The trees looked ordinary. Birds sang. The creek gurgled happily nearby. I was free. Or so I thought. Back at the cabin, I tried to convince myself it had been a hallucination. Maybe dehydration, maybe isolation. I left the next morning and drove back to the nearest town. I avoided the mountains for weeks. I told no one what had happened. But then it started. Small things at first. My reflection in the mirror looked wrong for a second. My eyes a little too wide, my mouth twitching unnaturally. Objects in my apartment moved slightly between rooms, just enough to make me question my memory. At night, I dreamt of the hollow, of the figures of the mound of stones. And each morning, the dreams left a faint residue, a tug at the edges of my mind. 2 months later, I received a package in the mail. Inside was one of the stones from the mound, smooth and cold, etched with spirals. There was no note, no return address. My stomach turned. I recognized it immediately. That night, I dreamed of the hollow again. The figures were waiting, taller and closer than ever. The stones on the ground glowed, and I heard, clear as day, a voice in my own mind. You left too much behind. We will finish what we started. I woke in a cold sweat, gasping, clutching the stone. I realized then that I had escaped physically, but part of me had remained behind. A fragment of my awareness, my consciousness, had been claimed. The hollow was patient. It had marked me, and now it was finding a way to reach me wherever I went. I have not returned to the mountains. I do not hike, I do not camp, I do not even drive near the ridges. And yet, every night, I feel a weight in my chest, a pull toward the hollows I can never see. I know they are waiting, and one day they will call me back. Because the Appalachian Mountains do not forget. They do not forget. They do not forgive. They only wait, and they are patient. I never thought much about living alone until the night it all went wrong. I had moved into a small house on the outskirts of town, a quiet street lined with maples that shook gently in the wind. My roommate had moved out months earlier, and for the first time in years, I had the place entirely to myself. It started innocently enough. I was making dinner, humming along to a podcast, when I glanced out the window and saw movement. At first, I assumed it was a neighbor walking their dog, but the street was empty. And then I noticed a figure standing at the edge of my yard, just beyond the reach of the streetlight. It didn't move, didn't shift, just stood there, tall and thin, completely still. I told myself it was nothing, that it was a trick of the light or my imagination. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it was watching me. I locked the doors, pulled the blinds, and tried to convince myself that was enough. I even called a friend, but my voice felt hollow as I explained what I was seeing, and they laughed it off. Probably just a neighbor or a passerby, they said. You're imagining it. I wanted to believe that, but when I went to bed, I could still see the shadow through the thin curtain barely outlined by the street lamp, and it hadn't moved. The next night, it was closer, at the edge of my driveway now. I try not to look, try to watch a movie, but I kept catching glimpses. The more I looked, the more impossible it seemed. Its face, I couldn't see one. No eyes, no mouth. Just a blank, smooth surface, pale in the dim light. I stayed inside, every door locked, clutching a baseball but I hadn't touched since college. Hours passed. Every creak of the house felt like a footstep, every whisper of wind like a voice. By morning, I was shaking uncontrollably. I tried to leave the next day. I opened the front door, hoping a morning glance would reveal nothing. But the figure was there, closer than before, staring with that blank, impossible face. My stomach twisted. I slammed the door and didn't try again. Days turned into nights. Each night, it returned, always patient, always silent. It never moved closer physically, but I could feel its attention like a pressure in my chest. I barely ate. I barely slept. I started seeing it in reflections, in windows of other houses on the street, standing there silently, as if it had been everywhere all along. Then something new appeared. Scratches. Thin, shallow lines on the front door, running horizontally. They hadn't been there before. My hands trembled as I ran my fingers over them. The house felt alive. The figure wasn't just outside. It was connected somehow to every creak of the floor, every shadow cast in the corner of my vision. One night, at the stroke of midnight, I saw it move. Not toward me, not really, but it raised an arm and pointed at something on the porch. I froze. A small notebook lay there, leather-bound, worn, old. I hadn't seen it before. I knew I shouldn't, but I reached for it. The moment my fingers touched the cover, the world shifted. Memories not my own flooded me. Streets I had never walked, houses I had never seen, people I had never met. And I realized with a cold certainty that the figure outside was not just watching me. It was recording me, learning me, preparing me. I dropped the notebook. The figure faded into the shadows, but I could feel it in my chest, in my mind. I was no longer just an observer. I had become part of it. Something had changed inside me. I didn't know what, but the world had tilted. The quiet street, the trees, the night, they all felt wrong, like the very air was waiting for me to notice something I couldn't quite name. I tried to escape the next day. My car wouldn't start. My phone was dead. Every road I knew led back to the house. I realized then that this wasn't a prank. This wasn't random. This was deliberate. Weeks passed. Shadows appeared in the corners of my vision. Figures standing in yards, at the edges of driveways and windows. Blank faces, patient, observing. And I understood something horrifying. I had joined them. I was learning what they had learned, seeing what they had seen. And then the strangest part happened. One evening, I stepped outside deliberately. Not to flee, not to confront, but to watch. And I saw a neighbor, alone in their yard, glance at me and freeze. Their eyes widened. I knew, somehow, that they had noticed me the way I had noticed the figure. I felt the cold certainty of inevitability. The figure hadn't just been outside to scare me. It had been outside to prepare me. And now I was ready. I was patient. I was learning. I stepped back onto my porch and watched. And I understood that this was how it always worked. Someone notices. Someone invites it in, even unknowingly. And then the waiting, the observing begins again. I'm no longer afraid. I have become the watcher. I step outside at night, I wait and I observe. The street is quiet, the house is asleep, but I see everything. And when someone new notices me, standing there at the edge of the yard, featureless, patient, watching, they will know. The horror is not outside. The horror is in the waiting. And now I wait. I don't usually do this. Talk about what happened. People call me reckless, obsessed, or worse. But I can't keep this to myself anymore. Some things don't stay buried, and some abandoned places don't stay abandoned. It started when I heard about the Ellsworth Hotel. Not a big city landmark or anything you'd find in a travel book. Just an old, crumbling building on the outskirts of a small town in Maine. Closed for over 50 years, it had been shut down after a series of unexplained deaths and disappearances. Nobody in town would go near it, especially after sunset. That's exactly why I had to see it. I arrived in late October, just as the sun was dipping below the horizon. The air was cold, carrying the scent of salt from the nearby ocean and the sharp tang of wet leaves. The hotel sat on a hill, its brick walls blackened with age, windows shattered, and ivy crawling over everything like it was strangling the building. Even from the road, I felt its presence, heavy and oppressive, like it was aware I was coming. The front doors were boarded up, but a side entrance had been ripped open long ago. I squeezed through the gap, flashlight in hand. The lobby was a ruin. Dust hung in the air, swirling in the beam of my light. Broken furniture, peeling wallpaper, and a grand staircase that had lost several steps loomed before me. I could hear my own footsteps, echoing in the silence. But beneath that, there was something else, a faint scraping like fingernails on wood. I told myself it was nothing. Rats, maybe? But the feeling in the pit of my stomach said otherwise. I moved through the lobby, taking photos and notes, documenting everything for my personal project. Most of the rooms were empty, but in some, old belongings remained. A cracked porcelain doll, a journal with pages yellowed and curling, a broken mirror. The staircase led to the upper floors, where the rooms had once been guest suites. The air was colder here, and the shadows longer. I reached the third floor and found a hallway lined with doors, each slightly ajar. A strange energy pulsed through the hall, like the building was breathing. I stepped cautiously, flashlights sweeping over the peeling wallpaper and broken glass. Then I saw movement. At first, I thought it was my imagination, a trick of the light. But one of the doors at the end of the hall creaked open, and a figure slipped inside. Pale, impossibly thin, with dark hollows where eyes should be. It didn't speak, but I felt it watching. My heart pounded as I raised my camera. The figure didn't move away, it just waited, and the air grew heavier with every second I stayed. I backed away slowly, my foot hitting something soft. I looked down and nearly screamed. It was a photograph lying on the floor. I picked it up and my stomach dropped. It was a picture of me, taken that very day, standing outside the hotel. Only my face was wrong, blank, expressionless, like someone had erased it. Panic hit me and I ran. Hallways twisted and shifted, leading me to rooms I didn't recognize. Doors opened to spaces that weren't supposed to exist. Long corridors lined with mirrors that reflected shadows that weren't mine. I realized then that the hotel wasn't just abandoned. It was alive, and it remembered everything. I reached what I thought was the stairwell, but when I stepped inside, I was back on the third floor. The figure appeared again, this time in the doorway across from me. And then I heard it. Not a voice, not words, but a series of faint whispers that crawled into my mind. Stay joined, become. I ran blindly, heart hammering, until I stumbled into the ballroom. Moonlight filtered through broken windows, casting pale rectangles on the dusty floor. Chandeliers swayed slightly, though no wind moved them. And there, in the center of the room, were dozens of figures, silent, faceless, gliding toward me. My flashlight flickered and died, plunging me into darkness. I screamed, but the sound was swallowed. The figures surrounded me, pressing close, their presence overwhelming. I felt my own body grow heavy, limbs moving as if they weren't mine. And then, suddenly they stopped. The room went silent. The figures receded, leaving me alone, or so I thought. I bolted through a door I hadn't noticed before. It led to the roof. Moonlight washed over me, and for the first time in what felt like hours, I could breathe. The town lay below, quiet and unknowing. I climbed down the fire escape and ran until the hotel was out of sight. I thought I had escaped. The next morning, I woke in my apartment, trembling but alive. Everything seemed normal. I told myself it had been a nightmare, a hallucination brought on by exhaustion and obsession. But then I noticed something, a photograph on my nightstand. I didn't take it. It was me, asleep, and in the corner of the image, the faint outline of a tall, faceless figure watching. I panicked, throwing across the room. Over the next few days, strange things happened. Shadows lingered longer than they should. Mirrors reflected glimpses of shapes that moved independently of me. Objects shifted when I wasn't looking. And then I realized the truth. The hotel had followed me home. Not physically, but in a way far worse. It had attached itself to me. Its awareness, its hunger, its presence. I tried to ignore it, to leave lights on, to avoid dark rooms, but it adapted. It was patient, always watching, always waiting. And I began to change. My dreams were no longer my own. My reflection didn't always match my movements. And late at night, I could hear whispers that weren't coming from anyone but me. Then, one evening, I woke to find the hotel in my apartment. Not physically, not fully, but its shape was there in the corner, walls stretching impossibly, corridors opening where there should be none. And in that moment, I understood I was never going to leave. Not really. The hotel didn't just want to claim me. It wanted me to exist as part of it, to become one with its memory, to carry its darkness into the world. I don't try to escape anymore. I stay awake, documenting, photographing, recording, anything to feed it, to satisfy it. It's patient, and so am I. I know one day it will take me fully, and I will willingly step into its halls, leaving nothing behind but shadows and whispers for someone else to find. Some abandoned places aren't just abandoned. They wait, they watch, and when they're ready, they follow. And the Ellsworth Hotel is patient.
Hope this story followed you into the dark. Like, comment, and subscribe for more nightmares.